Hello everyone, and welcome back to the ARPA Highlight Series. I am Cameron McLaughlin, the Equity and Engagement Coordinator in the People and Belonging Department, and I'm thrilled to have you join us today. The ARPA Highlight Series is here to shine a light on the amazing programs and resources made possible through Athens-Clarke County government's allocation and distribution of ARPA funds. Our goal is to educate and inform our community about the impactful work being done, the lives being changed, and the opportunities being created thanks to this vital funding. In this special edition, Season 1 finale episode of the ARPA Highlight Series, we're sitting down with Athens-Clarke County Mayor Girtz to reflect on the broader impact of ARPA funding across the community, from affordable housing and youth development to mental health and economic development. We'll explore how these investments have shaped critical programs and empowered local organizations to meet the needs of Athens residents. Join us as Mayor Girtz shares his perspective on the lessons learned, the challenges overcome, and the vision for a more equitable and resilient future for Athens-Clarke County. So sit back, relax, and get ready to be inspired by the stories and insights we will be sharing with you. Thank you for being here today.
Glad to be here, Cameron. I appreciate it. Very fortunate to be in this role as mayor of Athens-Clarke County, and excited about all the things that we continue to be able to work on together. Whether those are programmatic things like some of the youth development work we've done, or whether they're kind of physical and tangible to things like just the reconstruction of the Bishop Park Pool even, or the North Athens redevelopment.
All right, so let's talk a little bit about ARPA. Can you share your overall perspective of how ACC Gov approached the allocation and administration of ARPA funds?
So Athens-Clarke County received about $58 million in American Rescue Plan Act funds. And one of the first things we thought about is, well, how do we want to use these dollars? They were unexpected monies that we would not have received under other circumstances. But of course, the pandemic period was really traumatic. In some ways, it highlighted long-standing challenges. And so recognizing that whether it was around health issues or employment activity or housing, the pandemic heightened what was already true. We decided we really wanted to spend money in a way that was going to yield long-term dividends on those challenges. And so we decided to focus on a number of categories that were just identifying what was already true pre-pandemic and became kind of more challenging in the midst of the pandemic. And so that's how we began the conversation with that question, okay, what do we know we need as a community, and how has that need been heightened here amidst the COVID-19 pandemic? And so what can we do? So the biggest category of expenditure was around affordable housing, and the second largest category was around youth services. And then a few others included medical activities and workforce needs. We certainly spent some money doing some kind of smaller scale nuts and bolts things in the government. You look at some other governments around the state, and they spent money on things like waste vehicles. And that was important to a community that spent that money, but we had other funds that we could spend on things like that. And so we wanted to focus on these more human scale needs.
Let's talk a little bit about transparency. You know, the community likes to know how these monies have been spent. Could you talk about how ACC Gov ensures that transparency to the community as far as their involvement with the ARPA funding process?
Absolutely. So essentially every decision we make is in public. Now there's always going to be some preparation. I sometimes will joke with people that, I basically walk around life now just expecting that I'm being videoed and recorded everywhere I go. But the reality of planning is that you're always sitting with spreadsheets or doing some community analysis at your desk or at small scale meetings. But anytime we come close to a decision, we've got some public conversations around that. So from the mayor and commission policymaking perspective, a lot of those conversations happened in planning retreats and then ultimately found their way into the City Hall chamber, where we always go through a 2-cycle discussion at an agenda setting meeting and a voting meeting. And of course, sometimes things change a little bit from our planning retreats to ultimately a vote. So some funds did move around and we did make some modification in ultimate funding decisions, as is almost always the case when it comes to big scale decisions like this. And then after the decisions have been made about funding, we of course have a portal, accgov.com/ARPA, ARPA, where you can really see project by project what funds have been spent and what funds still remain.
Without like highlighting a specific organization, let's talk a little bit about programs individually. Is there a particular program or initiative funded by ARPA that you believe exemplify the impact of this funding?
Some of what we've recognized over the years is that particularly some young members of our community sort of have been less supported than others. And so part of what we were able to do with ARPA funds is extend our reach to 5-year-olds and 10-year-olds and 15-year-olds in a way that we hadn't prior. Some of that is just specific individuals who live maybe more distant from where there had been community facilities and support activities. And so the fact that we were able to open up some spaces that had been shuttered in decades past and young people have been able to spend productive time in those places means that those are young people who are going to be more skilled going into an academic year, more supported throughout the day and throughout the week, and ultimately better contributors to their own lives and contributors to society for years to come. You know, we're a community where we've come a long way in terms of youth services. If you go back in Athens to the year 2000, half of our high school students did graduate from the public school district in 2000. That means 1 out of 2, 50% of kids went into adulthood without a high school diploma. We've really worked hard as a community, including the school district and the unified government, the nonprofit community, and the business community, to drive that down. So today, 82 or 83% of kids get through their high school years with a diploma. Now that means we've still got some ground to gain. You know, we want to push that up to 100% of kids who are getting a high school diploma by the time they're 18 or 19 years old. And the fact that we've invested some funds this way means that we're going to be getting closer to that goal.
You mentioned organizations like business organizations and nonprofits, those grassroots organizations. Can you talk a little bit about how you feel this funding has impacted those businesses who might not have had access to this type of funding in previous time?
Here in the 2020s, in this, I guess what we're calling post-pandemic world, things are just really expensive. And so if you're running a small business, whether that's a home-based daycare or whether that's a professional services organization, maybe you're doing computer repair for somebody, it's just hard to get a business off the ground. And the fact that we've been able to give some grants and loans through ARPA and then CARES, which was the predecessor funding pot, means that people have just had a more stable life. And as spouse of somebody who runs a small business, I just know how much work it takes to bootstrap a business and to just grind every day, sometimes without a client load or without the support that you need. And the fact that we were able to be a little bit of a support, I know is meaningful to those many dozens of businesses who were able to access our funds.
You talked about other communities who kind of use their funding on infrastructure, for example. Can you talk about like some innovative approaches that came from the way Athens-Clarke County decided to invest their ARPA funds?
Well, one of the things that continually comes to mind is the engagement we had with the Memory and Justice team, who planned and memorialized around the Lindentown neighborhood. And we recognized, of course, that as a partner in the eminent domain that happened in that neighborhood off Baxter Street in the 1960s, you had many families of former homeowners who were underpaid for their property. And given the way that Georgia law is structured, it would have been hard for us to spend local funds to make that right. But because there are different legal strings around these federal American Rescue Plan Act funds, we were able to devote funds to the Black Future Center that's going to be opening in the next couple of years, as well as to down payment assistance and home repair, kind of in the name of Lindentown residents. And so that was a unique opportunity that we would not have had in the same way had ARPA not existed.
We've talked a lot about the great things that have come for ARPA. Let's just dig in just a little bit into some challenges you feel like managing these federal funding. Let's talk a little bit about those challenges and how us as a county have worked through those challenges.
One was even just on the political level, the policymaking level, deciding categorically how to spend that money. I described earlier that the biggest piece was in housing and the second largest piece was in youth services. Now, those aren't the only community priorities out there that are important, and we commonly recognize that. There are a bunch of priorities that are important, and figuring out what the scale of support for each of those categories would be, that was invariably going to be difficult. And then once we had a category determined, figuring out how we were going to engage within that category. Certainly there's a relatively limited set of people who are expert in affordable housing in Athens-Clarke County who really have the ability to get new housing out of the ground. Well, that always involves some bruised feelings in some cases. I often have to tell people in this role as mayor that I can't live in the land of magical thinking. I would wish that I had a bag of fairy dust that I could carry around town and just sprinkle and make things magically happen. It just doesn't work that way. We know there are a small handful of people who actually have the ability to pour concrete and swing a hammer and make houses come to being for people. And that's hard sometimes for people to accept because they, I think understandably, fervently want more housing opportunity to exist. But when you actually have to go down to the lumber yard and get lumber and you actually have to hire people to pour those foundations, that's when it comes down to brass tacks. And so ARPA exemplifies a common challenge we have, which is letting people know, hey, we want to get things done, and we can't just get things done by willing them into being. We actually have to engage with people who can lay down those bricks and mortar and put that roof on that structure.
So we talked a little bit about the challenges, and of course from challenges comes lessons that are learned. Could you talk a little bit about how those challenges led to lessons learned through this administration and how those lessons learned will impact the approach of different investment opportunities moving forward?
At least one lesson learned for me is that we have to continue to build capacity in the community. I talked about that a moment ago in the context of affordable housing, but that's true around youth services, it's true around business development, and a number of other areas as well. And so a lesson learned is that we've got to continue to figure out how to make this sustainable. We of course have to expend all these funds by the end of calendar year 2026. So we've got a year and a half from the moment where we're sitting down right now to do this work. Well, January 1st, 2027, we're still going to have young people in the community that need to be in good programs. January 1st, 2027, we're still going to have people who need to be in homes who can't afford those homes. So our challenge at the moment is figuring out how to sustain this work. Some of that, I have no doubt, is going to be on the public sector side. Some of it's going to be on the nonprofit sector side. And some of it I think is going to be in the private sector world. And so my desire as we sit here today is to figure out, hey, how do we keep these community centers that we opened up with ARPA funds open beyond our date when we have to spend all the money?
What role do you see local leadership playing in advocating for those continued funding investments?
Well, we're going to have to be creative, and we're going to have to use as many tools as we possibly can. You can't open up community centers and provide programming for 10 and 15-year-old kids just with a song. Some people out there might know the comedian Patton Oswalt, and he has this funny piece about Athens that's about 20 years old. You can find it on YouTube. So if you just go to YouTube, type in his name in Athens, Georgia, you'll find this funny piece. And he describes how in Athens people believe in magic. And people believe like, oh, I can sing you a song and then you'll get a bowl of soup for that song. That's not the way it works in the real world. And particularly when it comes to something like youth services, you have to pay people to show up in the afternoons after school and work with young people. You have to pay them to staff those summer camps. And so we're going to actually have to invest actual dollar bills in continuing those activities. Now the state has given us this new tool called a flexible local option sales tax. It's designed to offset a reduction in property taxes with a sales tax, but that doesn't mean you can't then increase the amount of property tax that after that you're expending. So I'd like us in the next year and a half to find a way that we can derive some new revenue to keep these youth centers open and keep the affordable housing and particularly the homeless work that we've started open.
We're coming to the end. I just have a couple more questions for you. What would you say to community members who want to better understand how ARPA funds were used or want to get involved with government funding investments moving forward?
Mm-hmm. Certainly, I tell everybody, whether you are just concerned as a resident about the public sector, whether you might think you want to run for office or whether you want to be a supporter through a nonprofit, come engage, come see our meetings. Everything is open to the public. You can email or call my office. And certainly if you just want a snapshot, again, if you go to accgov.com/ARPA, you can see the funds that we've spent. And there is a lot of work to do here. And we have a giving and a loving community, and that's one of the things that has continued to sustain me, even in tougher times where things can be a little bit bruising and dicey. The fact that people care so dearly is the thing that I think sustains us all here in Athens.
Well, thank you for taking the time to sit with me. In closing, is there anything else you'd like to share with our residents about the broader legacy of ARPA funding here in Athens-Clarke County?
Well, I'll make one note, and that's that while we still have a lot of ground to gain, I mentioned earlier that the high school graduation rate has improved dramatically over the last 25 years here in Athens. And here we're having this conversation in July 2025. And I will note that on the public safety front, this is the first year in recorded history when we've gotten to July of a calendar year with no murders in our community. And that speaks to the fact that we've invested from so many different angles. And in the same way that I want to continue to have youth opportunity be the case, I want to continue to see that this is a community with less trauma and violence. And so by our collective action, we've helped make that more true in 2025 than we had in any prior year.
Thank you for joining us on this special edition, Season 1 finale episode of the ARPA Highlight Series. We hope you've gained valuable insight into the vision, impact, and continued momentum of ARPA-funded initiatives across Athens-Clarke County. A special thanks to Mayor Girtz for taking the time to share his perspective on the transformative work made possible by this unique opportunity to invest in our community's recovery and resilience. His leadership and dedication continue to shape a stronger, more equitable future for our community. Be sure to tune in to next season as we continue to spotlight the people, programs, and partnerships driving positive change in Athens-Clarke County. Until next time, take care, stay informed.